I want to welcome you today. My name is David Douglas. I want to welcome you to the Douglas Family History YouTube channel. If you could, please subscribe to this channel. That would help us out a lot. We are continuing this journey with the Douglas family history. And today we're going to be talking about the Douglas family of Virginia. And I want to start this video with the first Douglas of this specific family that came to America. And it was a young man named John Douglas. And he was born in St. Margaret, Westminster, London, England on May the 13th, 1651. His parents was James Douglas and Welcy Bertie Brown. He was transported into Charles City, Virginia in about 1660 by a man named Thomas Callaway. John at this time would have been only 9 years of age. There were 5 others that were transported with him, and they were Thomas Charleston, John Brain, Rebecca Hotham, or otherwise Hawthorne, and Thomas Griffin. These 4 appears also in the St. Margaret Westminster Parish baptism records, along with John Douglas and his family. And there, the other 2 was John Radcliffe that was on board, and he was from the St. James, Clerkenwell, London, England. And a young lady named Susanna Langworth. She was from the St. Andrew, Holborn, Camden, London, England. All 6 of these individuals were from the London, England area. This record that I just got through talking about appears in the Charles City County, Virginia court order record. This was brought to court October the 18th, 1664. A lot of time they would transport them some years earlier, and then it would take a while, to get through the court system. But I believe that they were transported around the year 1660 because Susanna Langsworth appears on an earlier court record of 1660 in Charles City County, Virginia. At that time, Thomas Callaway's plantation was located along the James River in the state of Virginia, or the colony of Virginia, between what is known as Flower Hundred and Powell Creek. John Douglas would have had to work until he was 21 years of age because he was a minor at the time that he was transported. We really don't know the reason why John was leaving England at such a young age, but looking at the parish records, his parents, James and Welcy Bertie, lost several children by death. I mean, this could have been, an epidemic. And I know they had also, I believe, previously been through, different wars, and sometimes disease and epidemics follow. The family, just fell on hard times, and even financial, losses and personal losses. And you may wonder, why would his family send him away to America so far away from his family, and even to a land seemed like, would have been full of strangers and people, he didn't know? But in my research, there was a man named Thomas Douglas who was already in Charles City County, Virginia. This Thomas Douglas, I believe, was a cousin, possibly a second cousin of John Douglas. This Thomas Douglas was transported along with 49 other people by Richard Tye and Charles Sparrow on August 1650. A Charles City County court order book has this Thomas Douglas at about 26 years of age in the year 1656. putting him to be born about 1630. and I found another record back in England, a baptismal record, and the only one that come close to this age was a Thomas Douglas born in 1634 in Datchet, Buckinghamshire, England. To his father was Thomas Douglas, and his mother was Elizabeth Randall. This Thomas Douglas's grandfather, who was John Douglas, and my John Douglas, the first immigrant, that was transported into Charles City County, Virginia, that John Douglas, his grandfather, and William Douglas, were brothers. So that I believe would put this Thomas Douglas that was already in Charles City County, Virginia, and John Douglas about second cousins. This Thomas Douglas would marry a woman named Joan Sanders, who they said was the relic, or either really what we would say, the widow of William Sanders. So after William Sanders died, Thomas Douglas married Joan Sanders. I do not know her maiden name. They had one daughter, Elizabeth. Now, I believe that her name was Elizabeth because Thomas's mother was Elizabeth Randall, and his father was Thomas Douglas. So I believe she was named after her grandmother. And then Elizabeth would marry a man named Edmund Irby, and they had a son named Douglas Irby. Douglas Irby would inventory an estate of Robert Burgess, which part of that estate he was actually holding for the orphans of John Douglas, and this was dated 1716. So the John Douglas that I'm talking about, being the first immigrant, died approximately around 1712, 13, and then later on they were trying to get what part of the estate, that belonged to John Douglas's orphans, and Robert Burgess was holding on to that. So it was being inventoried by Douglas Irby. So I believe these families were close. Thomas Douglas had a daughter, Elizabeth. She married Edmund Irby. They had this son and even other children. This Douglas Irby was so close to John and these orphans, that he was willing to do the inventory to make sure that they got their part of their father's estate. So this was dated 1716. Now it was actually changed over, and Prince George County, Virginia was cut out, that part of Charles City, Virginia. And you could find that in that Prince George County, Virginia court order book. So really, to a certain extent, this John, like I said, who was 9 years old at the time he was transported, was not really far from family, from maybe his immediate family, but so to speak, Thomas Douglas was there, a second cousin. And he might not have been financially able to transport him, but he might have even got word to Thomas Callaway that some way, John and John's family, wanted him to come to America. That's just the way that I feel like that I'm interpreting this, and I see this. So Thomas was here when John arrived. So, but this John Douglas also, I believe, had another relative nearby in Surry County, Virginia. That was right there close to Charles City County, Virginia. According to those years that before they began to form the other county, they were right there. This John Douglas, who I believe was Thomas Douglas's brother. He did have a brother named Thomas Douglas. And around that age, I believe we would put this one as his brother. He was transported into Surry County, Virginia on August the year 1655, along with 17 other people by, get this, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Swan. And this Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Swan would appear a lot in the Charles City County, Virginia court order book. So he was in and out from Surry County into Charles City County. So having family in Virginia, the way I see it, probably helped this young 9-year-old John Douglas to adapt to the new world called America. Now, not long after John arrived in Virginia, approximately 8 years later in 1668, John's father, James, would die there in the St. Margaret, Westminster, London, England area. You can find that in the parish records. So, one of the first documents after his arrival took place in Charles City, Virginia, in a town called Westover. That's where they held their court proceedings. The document stated that John Douglas appeared in court with a little Indian girl named Mary, who was the judge to be 6 years old. So this was probably to legalize her indentureship to John Douglas. She might have been an orphan and he took her up. So he had to go to court to have them to judge, how old she was. This John Douglas appears on land deed transaction between Henry Batt and James Threet of the Bristol Parish, Charles City County, Virginia at that time. It was also witnessed by Joseph Maddox and John Peterson. Henry Batt and John Threet and John Peterson, these men would end up, their names and their families, and they would all follow, amen, even this Douglas family into the Brunswick County, Virginia area. And this document was dated January the 7th, 1692. Then on April the 29th, John Douglas, Ralph Jackson, and Joseph Maddox would transport 16 individuals into Charles County, and they did this just like Thomas Callaway and Thomas Swan. They did this in order to receive a land grant. And these three individuals, John Douglas, Ralph Jackson, and Joseph Maddox, coming together in a land agreement to get 784 acres of land. The land would then be divided up between these three men. Ralph Jackson would receive 284 acres. Joseph Maddox would receive 200 acres, and John Douglas would receive 300 acres of the southernmost part of this land. This land, the agreement said, the document said, was located near Monk's Neck Creek. And in 1693, John also owned cattle, and he had to register his mark and brand in court. So he settled there in that 300 acres of that 784 acre land that all three of them went in agreement with. He took the 300 acres, and we're going to talk about that maybe just in a little bit. Actually, and that area is actually there today, and there's a certain name that would tell you that specific location. On March the 23rd, 1695, John Douglas and said Edward Burchett were joined together and buy land belonging to Henry King. This land was located in the Bristol Parish at the head of Bailey's Run in Charles City County, Virginia. Then on April the 3rd, 1696, John Douglas and Edward Burchett was mentioned on the estate records of Henry King about a land transaction in 1695. John Douglas would then witness the 1697/98 will of John Perry in the Bristol Parish area. The Perry family also moved in, and I think there's a road agreement there in the Brunswick County, Virginia area. So these families stayed close together. Not long after that, Prince George County, Virginia was formed from Charles City County, Virginia. John Douglas appears next on the 1704 Prince George County, what they call the quit rent list. and he still had his land holdings at this time of 300 acres of land. Sometimes about 1712, John Douglas died in the Bristol Parish, Prince George County, Virginia area. This is based on two records that I found, one dated October the 8th, 1714, that states William Mays and Mary, his wife, of Bristol Parish, Prince George County, Virginia. They were in a land agreement transaction with Samuel Birch for 180 acres of land. This land was located on Arthur's Swamp near Monk's Neck Creek. It was said that this land was located by the lands owned by John Douglas and Ralph Jackson, who were deceased at this time. Arthur Swamp, Virginia, that area is there today, and I believe that is in what they call Dinwiddie County. You could find Arthur Swamp, and I think there was even a Civil War battle in Arthur Swamp. Then there was a court hearing that took place. This is the second record. It talks about him dying around 1712 to 1713. There was a court hearing that took place on October the 9th, 1716, that named William Maddox and Robert Burgess, and this was a petition by William Maddox that he was of Shirley for Robert Burgess, late of this county, for the payment that the estate belonging to the orphans of John Douglas. He was just there to see. William Maddox was wanting to make sure that they got the part of their father's estate that Robert Burgess were holding on to, in the amount of 60 pounds as a bond. And this was dated March the 21st, 1712/1713. It also states that there remained in the hand of the said Robert Burgess, unpaid to the orphans of John Douglas, who was deceased, 35 pounds. And George Woodleaf and William Wallace, after themselves of security for William Maddox for payment to the orphans of John Douglas, deceased. John did marry, and his wife's name is unknown at this time, but the orphan's name, I believe, leaves one, William Douglas Sr., born 1692. Let me back up. That estate, like I said, that was taken into court, Robert Burgess. That's the one that Douglas Irby and George Woodleaf, and there was even others that actually stood in and took inventory. I think a man whose last name was Standback. 3 of these men. So that's where Douglas Irby, that's the agreement that he come in for inventory to make sure that the orphans of John Douglas was taken care of. But John did marry, and his wife's name at this time is unknown. But these orphans, I believe, are William Douglas, who I would call William Douglas Sr., who was born 1692, John Douglas, who was born 1693, James Douglas, born 1694, David Douglas, born 1695. There might have been other children, but these are the only ones that I have pinpointed down, I believe, being the orphans of John Douglas. Like I said, there probably was other children, but they have not been found and named at this time. These 4 men would end up in Brunswick County, Virginia. There is a document that states Robert Douglas, son of William Douglas Sr., would make 3 trips back in the Bristol Parish, Prince George County, Virginia, to be a witness in court for Edward Burchett Jr. This would show, I believe, the Douglases of Brunswick County, Virginia, were from the area of Bristol Parish, Prince George County, Virginia. William Douglas Sr. first appeared on a land record on September the 28th, 1728, to receive 100 acres of land in Isles of Wight County, Virginia. And it would later be formed, or Brunswick County would be formed even out of that county. This land was located on the south side of Meharry River, next to Thomas Reeves' land. October the 4th, 1733, William Douglas, along with other men, and his son, would appear on a document about clearing of the road in Brunswick County, Virginia. Then December the 6th, 1734, there was a court record that listed William Douglas and his wife Rebecca. So we have William Douglas's wife's first name. Said, and this was ordered that William Battersby to compensate William and Rebecca Douglas. William Douglas appears on an estate record of William Hogan in 1735 in Brunswick County. And this estate record would also list two of his sons, Robert Douglas and John Douglas. They were two sons of actually William, or actually grandsons of William Douglas. August the 2nd, 1736, William acquired 150 acres of land in Brunswick County, Virginia, on the south side of the Meharry River near Nathaniel Perry. During this time, James Douglas and John Douglas, who I believe were three brothers of William Douglas, all were living in the Brunswick County, Virginia area. William Douglas and his wife Rebecca would have two children. Like I said, now Robert and John possibly, might have been, I said sons, but, backing up, it might have been one of his sons and then his brother, John, that helped witness that. All these names, they all familiar, and they all kind of start coming together. So I believe that Robert and John, I believe Robert was his son and John was actually his brother. So, but him and Rebecca, I believe, would have two children that I have found, and they were Margaret and Robert Douglas. It was this Robert that would make 3 trips back into the Bristol Parish, Prince George County, to appear in court to be a witness for Robert Burgess Jr. And he was paid 405 pounds of tobacco for his service for those trips. And I believe this links, again I say, this links the Douglas family of Brunswick County, Virginia, with John Douglas of the Bristol Parish, Prince George County, Virginia. I believe this was Robert's grandfather. Robert Douglas died at an early age, around 38 years of age, in the Brunswick County, Virginia area in 1742. On April the 1st, 1742, his father, William Douglas Sr., and Michael Wall are submitting security for Robert Douglas's widow, Mary, in court so she could be the administrator for her husband's estate. Only 2 sons were mentioned on this estate record. Robert Douglas and Thomas Douglas were mentioned on this estate record about receiving portions of their father's estate. Now, there were other children, but I believe they were too young at this time to actually for their names to appear in court on estate records. And their children would show up later in Halifax County, Virginia. And they actually were, and all their children, all of Robert Douglas, who died in 1742, and Mary, who her maiden name is unknown at this time, they would have Robert Douglas, born 1732, Thomas Douglas, born 1733. These were the only 2 listed on the estate record, but there was other children. James Douglas, born 1734, William Douglas Jr., and I mentioned that as far as junior because his grandfather was the senior, born 1735, John Douglas, born 1737, Mary Douglas, born 1739, and Elizabeth Douglas, born 1741, about a year before her father died. So William Douglas is senior in 1764. These names, a lot of them would appear. They would be married. I believe the young ladies would marry, Mary would marry Thomas Mann, and Elizabeth would marry a Ward. And all these names appear on the 1764 will of their grandfather, William Douglas Sr. So, then William Douglas's brother John, he would remain in Brunswick County. He made a good life for himself according to his estate and the inventory of his estate record. He did real well there. When he died and left a will dated 1751 in Brunswick County, Virginia, and his widow was a lady named Mary. And William and his other 2 brothers, James and David, would move and settle in the northern part of North Carolina in a place called Jacket Swamp in Halifax County, North Carolina. The next video that I will take us back to England, where John, the immigrant, my first ancestor, maybe even some of your, could be your first ancestor that came over in 1660 from England. So we're going to take you back to England and share with you some of the journey that will continue on with this Douglas family. Thank you for listening, and thank you for subscribing to this YouTube channel. Give us maybe a thumbs up, make a comment. Our comment is open. If I can help you in any way with this certain family history, and I've got the records, I'll be more than glad as far as to share it. Thank you for listening today.